hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures.
Hi, I'm Deb Maybury, and you're listening to Reveal, Connect, and Heal. And this evening, I'm speaking with Diane Spindler. Hi, Diane. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Thanks so much for taking the time and speaking with me.
It's my pleasure.
So let's just begin by just sharing a little bit about yourself. I know that you're a psychologist, and I connected with you via somebody that we've both spoken to in the past, and he was talking to me about a therapy that you created called Gentle Therapy. So maybe say a little bit about your path getting to where you are now, and then we'll get into the therapy itself.
Well, it's also actually called Gentle Reprocessing.
Okay.
And I would say I've been starting this since I started college in the 70s. I found that there wasn't really any quick way to get people to process through their traumas. And I started looking for something that would help people process their traumas quickly. So this is a combination of multiple types of therapy, sort of cherry picking the best out of all of them, and
Right.
allowing people to process their therapy through gently and quickly.
So you started out as a psychotherapist. That's what you went to school for, correct?
Yes.
So I know that traditionally there's I always find it well, it's amusing, but also heart-wrenching, really, when you hear that people have gone to therapy for years and years and years, and they still are very much in the trauma. Is that where this methodology came out of, or the reason why?
Yes, most most likely because um, I was finding we could talk about the trauma and it really didn't move it. And gentle reprocessing actually moves trauma fairly quickly. Most of my clients, even the ones with pretty deep trauma, are I see them for probably 6 months to a year.
That's quite a short period of time when you talk about some serious trauma. Now, what do you mean by move the trauma?
Well, it sort of dissolves it. It literally moves from the back of their brain to the front of their brains, where the front of their brains is sort of where we put all of our memories. It's kind of your file cabinet. The back of the brain is where trauma sits because the brain doesn't know what to do with it.
Mm.
And when people get triggered, it's because the back of their brain, it's almost as if the trauma was happening at that moment. The sounds, the sights, the smells all come flooding back, and all the emotions. And at that point, people feel pretty overwhelmed.
Yes. Yes, a lot of the time when I work with people, you know, people in their lives often say, move beyond the trauma, just put it behind you, forget it and everything. And we know very well that the trauma is located and it's embedded very deeply within an individual. And I think that becomes part of the trauma is then that they are triggered and they're re-traumatized and they just can't seem to shift. So tell me what the gentle processing, what actually does that do to make that shift or movement occur?
Well, trauma is basically made up of 4 different areas. One is the event itself. The next 2 I think of as twins. One being all the emotions that come with that trauma, but every single one of those emotions are embedded somewhere in the physical body. And the 4th one, I think, is the most damaging, and that's the negative belief systems that start to build up based on the trauma.
Let's talk about that one because I think that is very disturbing with a lot of people and the negative belief systems, whether it's low self-esteem or zero self-worth or self-love. And then also when people are trying to numb themselves with various things like alcohol or drugs, then that creates so many more levels of trauma, really. So speak about that.
Well, basically, if you just go for the negative beliefs, it's sort of like pouring whipped cream on worms and saying it's dessert. It doesn't work.
I've never heard that before. That's great.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
it doesn't work because the underlying worms are still there, even though the
Yes.
whipped cream's on the top. So when you say, oh, I love myself, I'm wonderful, I'm a good person, it's the whipped cream. And underneath the worms are going, oh, no, you're not. So what gentle reprocessing does is it goes in and it helps people release the emotions and the body sensations. And once those are released from the trauma no longer has any power. And when the trauma doesn't have any power, that's when you go in and put the new positive beliefs in. And at that point, it's like putting whipped cream on angel food cake instead of worms.
Which is much more appealing. I'm sure I'm going to have bad nightmares tonight about that. Next time I see whipped cream, it's just, not that I eat that very often, but it's going to totally destroy the idea of whatever's under it. So those two stages. So the first one is actually the process that you've created. So speak a little bit about that, and then let's remember to go back to, okay, what do we feed in? Not the positive affirmations per se, but the heart and potato, like the potatoes of that, like what are you putting in there afterwards? So what do you do in the beginning?
Give you a quick example. Say you didn't get enough brownies when you were a kid. Everybody else, your mother would make brownies every Friday afternoon. Everyone would come in for brownies, and you didn't get any. Now, maybe it was because you're diabetic. Maybe she thought you should be on a diet. We don't know why. But you didn't get them. Everybody else did. Mm-hmm. So it was traumatic for you. So you might feel that in your, feel really sad in your heart. And you might feel angry in your fists. And you might feel hurt in your stomach. And if you say to somebody, you know, when you feel sad, where do you feel it? Most people are able to tell you. Mm-hmm. So the gentle reprocessing basically uses a metaphor, like a water going by, to release the feelings. So the sadness would turn into water, and then the water would go by you, and then it would be gone. And I go through each one of those so that people can, at the end, they no longer have feelings either in their bodies or emotional feelings about the trauma. Once that's all cleared and the person can think about the brownies, smell brownies, and not feel all upset, at that point you can put in the positive affirmations and they really stick. So you're actually rebuilding people's sense of self when you put in those positive affirmations at that point.
Okay, so say I was dealing with memories that kept coming up with regards to something that happened, and let's use sexual abuse because this is very common where people get stuck in trauma. Mm-hmm. So what would be the first thing? So okay, so I'll give you a scenario so we can give people an idea exactly what you're doing. So let's just say every time I saw a peace sign, it put me back to 1973 when my perpetrator would say, come on, get in the car and I'm going to take you, to the store for a treat or something. And then he would end up taking me to his place, for example. So what would you do to get that peace sign scenario out of my mind?
Well, what I would see, that it's the whole memory, not just the peace sign. Okay. So what I would say is when you think about what happened in 69, whatever year you gave me, what's the first emotion that comes up? And you might say terror, because that's usually what I get when people have been sexually abused. And I'd say, where do you feel? And so you're not thinking, as soon as you say terror, you're starting to separate yourself from what happened because you're thinking about the emotion itself. And then I'd say, where do you feel that in your body? You may feel it all over your body, maybe shaking like a leaf. At that point, I would go into the metaphor with you and say, if you were on an island in the middle of a river with a protection around you, what would that water going by you look like if it was terror? Now, it might be right up over the dome of the protection. It might be dark. It might be turbulent. And then while you're on the island and you're safe within that island, I would ask you to just do something else while you're waiting for that water to go by. Now, you're actually talking to your subconscious at that point, using a metaphor, which is a symbol, which is the language of the subconscious.
Yes.
And once that water went by, I'd bring you back to, okay, now when you run a movie of what happened that day, what emotion comes up now? And it might just be fear as opposed to terror. And where is that in your body? What does the fear look like? It's still dark and deep, but it's not as bad as it was. And we'd go through all the emotions, which in that case would probably be multiple emotions. Once all of those emotions have been cleared, you would be able to think of that peace sign, you would be able to think of that day, and it would be almost like it happened to someone else, or it would fade, or a cartoon, or you'd barely be able to think about it because it wouldn't exist anymore, because it's been really moved from the back of your brain to the front of your brain.
I see. So you're completely rewiring that thinking pattern.
Absolutely.
Now, why does that work? Do you know the science behind that? I'm curious.
Because you're speaking the language through the symbols of your subconscious or the back of your brain, your primitive brain, and it's now able to allow those feelings to go away. And because I do one emotion at a time and use the metaphor, it's not overwhelming. It's not like I'm asking you to tell me about that day. I very seldom get very much information. Just saying, you know, I was abused in 1968 by a stranger who took me in a car and back to his place. That's all I would need to know. So you don't have to repeat all the stuff to me. I use that as your target, and we go from there.
Right, and that's very soothing. I know one of the things, the work that I do with harmony integration, is actually sort of the opposite. It's like dive in and really get in there and reveal that moment, and then you shift. It's a time and space sort of thing that happens, and it discharges the charge. But the concern is a lot of people don't want to go into that level. So this is another sort of a gentle way, and I see it as doing the same thing, just in a completely different way. And that's what's so great about learning about different methodologies, is that different ones work better for different people. There's so much wisdom out there. So how did you discover this? How did you come across this? Because this is your body of work, right?
Well, every time I get trained in something new, whether it was psychoanalytic or family work or cognitive behavioral work or EMDR, I would get very excited about that and say, oh, this must be the way psychotherapy is done. But then I would find some problems with it, things that didn't work very well. So what I ended up doing was a combination of all of that, and it became gentle reprocessing. So it has elements of multiple regular therapy methods, which makes it very easy for most psychotherapists to get on board with it, because it feels very familiar to them because they've already learned a lot of this stuff. It's just in a little bit of a different format.
So have you kind of taken a little bit from here and there, and just after, I mean, I don't even know how long you've been practicing, but over a long period of time, then just sort of tweaked it here and there and just sort of come up with something that produced the best results?
Right, and it was the results that I was looking for. So if I found there was a problem with my results, I would change my methodology. And I have over time. The methodology has gotten a lot crisper, if you will.
That's wonderful. So what is the longevity of this? Do people have to do, you said about 6 months to a year typically that they're working with you, or and then is it gone, or what? How does it work?
I've talked to people 10 years later, and whatever we worked on is gone still.
Wow,
So
that's wonderful.
it seems to be a permanent fix. Like, as you mentioned earlier, it's a way of rewiring us, so that it's not a problem anymore. So
Well, that's so amazing, because people carry trauma for such a long period of time, and to actually remove it permanently, that's I think a dream come true for a lot of people. So who do you work with this methodology? Are you working one-on-one with people? Is this a group exercise that can be done, or is this for adults, children, other therapists? Who are you working with or training?
well, I am working. This works with kids as young as about 2.5,
Wow.
and I've worked with people in their 80s. So it's a full population. It works well with, I would say, 70 to 80% of the people that I work with. Either they can do it or they can't. Um,
Why would
I would
somebody
say-
not be able to do it? Why would it
um,
not be successful?
well, I find that people that are very intellectual and want to figure out how it's working
Oh,
get so into how it's working that they don't do it.
I totally understand. I can appreciate that one completely. Yes.
Um, most of the sessions take about, I can fit it in within an hour session.
Wow.
Um, so it gives you, it works really well if you do a little piece at a time. But a lot of the traumas can be taken care of in a session.
So if people have multiple traumas, then you're dealing with each one individually.
Right. But say they had been raped by multiple people, but it was a very similar scenario. One will take away all of the rapes.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. So now I read on your website that you give workshops. Is it just the like other is it psychiatrists or psychologists? Do you train
Just
different people or?
other psychotherapists.
Okay.
So in the States, it's social workers, licensed mental health workers, licensed marriage family workers, psychologists, and if psychiatrists were interested, they could take the classes too.
Okay, so somebody can come one-on-one therapy with you, or then if they're a practicing therapist, then they could also go on your website, go to a workshop to learn about how to do this?
Yes, I'm actually going to be teaching at BU over the Halloween weekend.
Okay, so
So,
tell people what BU is.
oh, I'm sorry, it's Boston University.
Okay, because you're in the Boston area, which I
Yeah,
didn't mention at the beginning.
right.
Okay, well that's really interesting, and I'm glad I stumbled upon this work. I find it very interesting. Now, one other thing I wanted to ask you is you mentioned a drawing type therapy when you were working with children.
Um, there's actually two types of gentle reprocessing. One I call internal, one I call external. The internal is the metaphor with the river, and other metaphors if that one isn't comfortable for people. Um, and the external is drawing and storytelling. So people would actually draw the emotions on a piece of paper and tear it up, and then I do a storytelling process with them that helps them defeat the what I call the monster or the trauma, and then we go back and do the drawing again just as a diagnostic to see if that trauma has really disappeared.
Hmm, that's interesting. And how long does it take a therapist to, learn the skills to apply this in their practice?
Well, I have two courses that I teach. One's a 2-day, that's the opening, and with that course they can go and do a lot of what I've been doing with my own clients. And then there's a second 1-day class if they want to go even deeper with their clients, and it combines inner child work in a very simple way by just having them work with the little boy or the little girl that is holding most of the trauma.
Right.
And combine that with gentle reprocessing.
All right. Well, that sounds really interesting. Now, you had something online as well, did you not?
That's the external gentle reprocessing course, and people can go online and take that. Um, and a lot of people I've taught that both in Colorado and up in Quebec, actually. And a lot of people who took that class, which was an hour and a half, are still using it. And that was back in the beginning of the century. Is that what we call it?
Yes. Well, an hour and a half, that doesn't seem like a very long time to help people shift trauma from their lives. That's pretty incredible. Is there
Well,
anything else? Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
um, we're wrapping up the time now, so is there anything else that you'd like to share? Any tips or any wisdom that you'd like to share with the viewers?
Well, one of the beauties of this process is people can go and use it themselves outside of therapy. So if something comes up, they can release things quickly before they become issues for them. And one little girl who was about 7 did the external gentle reprocessing, and she went home, and that night her sister, who slept in her room, had a nightmare. So her sister was 5, so she got out her crayons and did it with her sister and got rid of her nightmares that she had been having. So
Wow.
it's simple.
That's amazing. I think I need to learn how to do that. Because I work with so many people with various traumas, and obviously a lot of the times that that affects their sleep. And
Oh,
if
absolutely.
somebody can get out some crayons and draw some pictures and get through an evening of a bad experience, then that would be really special to be able to share that with people. Yeah.
Well, that's the online course, so it's fairly easy to pick up.
Oh, okay. So anybody can go. It doesn't have to be a therapist. Anybody could go and do the online course.
Um, it's available. I'm just going to set it that way.
Okay. Thanks so much. I can appreciate that. It's sort of like when you create something like this and you know it's so helpful, you want everybody to be able to do it. And
Absolutely.
yet you also want to be responsible in giving that information out and who is utilizing that, because you can do the body of the work, but then there can be other things that come up during the not the therapy or the working with somebody that then that individual can't deal with because they don't have anything else to pull out of their mind beyond doing your course, right?
It is important, especially with the internal work, the internal gentle reprocessing, that you have a background in psychotherapy so that if your client does go off kilter, that you do have the tools to bring them back.
Right. I think everybody can appreciate that. There's an awful lot out on YouTube, for example, where people learn a little bit about a certain type of methodology, but they don't know the ins and outs, and they try to apply it, and then two things happen. They either try it and they say, "Oh, this doesn't work," you know, or
Hmm.
they try it and they get a little bit of relief, and then it's gone because they haven't done the whole
Right.
cleansing of
Absolutely.
their spirit, right? Getting the trauma out there. So okay, well, listen, thank you so much, Diane, for spending this time this evening. I really appreciate it. Can you share just your website or where people can get in touch with you?
It's www.gentlereprocessing.com.
Thank you so much. And Diane's in Boston, and if anybody's interested in getting in touch with her, please don't hesitate, because I've spoken with her a couple times and that she's just an endless stream of information, many years experience. So thanks again, Diane, for spending some time with me this evening. I'm Deb
I really
Maybury.
appreciate the
Okay.
opportunity.
Oh, great to talk with
Sorry.
you. It's perfect. It's all great. I'm Deb Maybury, and you've been listening to Reveal, Connect, and Heal.
There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wings. hopes and treasures, beyond your broken wing. Ooh, beyond your broken